Yesterday, we talked about America's first baby steps towards reining in the near undisputed dominance of big tech platforms. But the US are not the only ones making some moves, although they are probably the most important, as they are the ones in the most direct position to enforce rules upon the big tech giants. But the European Union has also been engaging in its own form of nonsense as well. You may remember the US bill, they didn't show you all of it, but it was fairly short, relatively concise as far as legalistic measures goes. Meanwhile, the European Union has produced this thing. I feel the need to insert some kind of comedic music, but I'm not sure I can find anything long enough, frankly. It is about 1,000 pages of legalistic waffle of dubious import and or meaning. Hell, I don't even know if half of this actually means anything, really. We've started to hit some tables now. Dun 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 dun. There we go, we arrived at the annotations at the very end. Right. Now, to be fair, the US bill as well, regulating platforms' ability to prefer their own content and their own products over others, also had something like 100 amendments, I think. One of which was rather interesting as well, namely that the protections offered by the bill would not be extended to certain foreign actors, amongst others China, which honestly does kind of make a degree of sense, because, well, China already is engaging in a trade war, so why shouldn't the US do the exact same thing, but by saying, right, Google, you don't get to unfairly prefer your own stuff, but you are allowed to unfairly prefer American stuff over Chinese stuff, and hey, you know what? Fair enough, honestly. But there are some useful things in this hilariously massive diatribe here as well, along with a lot of absolute garbage too. One of the more interesting things is that users are informed about and can contest removal of content by platforms. There is a mention of this in the gargantuan law proposal that I showed you, which isn't law yet, by the way. It needs to be fully ratified by the various member states before it comes into action, but it's the EU, it's basically a rubber stamp at this point. Essentially, the rules state that platforms must be very clear on what is and is not allowed on their platforms. They must be specific. No more loose and wavy terms, except when those loose and wavy terms are, part of law, like hate speech, for example. That is a legal term in far too many European countries. But they must be able to go, okay, this is the rule you broke, this is where you broke it, and here are your opportunities to appeal this decision, which right now doesn't exist at all. YouTube can yeet your ass for virtually nothing. They can give you a warning if they're feeling particularly nice about it, or if they're very, very generous, they'll only give you one strike, in which case they'll go, oh, here's the video. This is the loosely defined rule you broke, something, blah, 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 inciting hatred. We're not going to tell you which part, or at what time, or anything like that, so, figure it out. It's not great. And as for appeals, they don't exist, essentially. Hell, if you, YouTube has a 3-strike system. If you get 3 strikes, they simply just delete your entire channel, which is a little bit of a problem considering if you've got a massive backlog of stuff and YouTube suddenly changes its terms of service, well, all they need to do is find 3 instances in those 300-odd videos to slap their arbitrary measures on, and voila, your account is gone. And as for your ability to appeal, well, that's tied to your Google account, which is also gone. It is a beautiful system of circular logic, which this law will try to fix. Users will also have access to dispute resolution mechanisms in their own country. This one is key because theoretically, technically, there are appeal systems within Google's YouTube, except you don't have access to any of them because they've yeeted your Google account. And so you are going to need a relevant governmental agency wherever you are to go to YouTube and say, hey, we've received a complaint regarding this and this user, we need to get all of the information you have and we need to be able to set up an appeals process. I do believe this was one of the things that the YouTuber Union was arguing for too, so I'm hoping that this at least will be instituted. Transparent terms and conditions for platforms, good fucking luck. More safety and better knowledge of the real sales of products that users buy, this one is more of a fluffy one really. Stronger obligations for very large online platforms to assess and mitigate risk at the level of the overall organization of their service for users, right where restrictions of rights and risks of viral spreading of illegal or harmful contents are most impactful. That is a series of words that have no meaning put in that particular order. What they're referring to here is that the online platforms will have a strong obligations to follow EU regulations to screw you out of these rights that they are giving you if there is sufficient reason to do so, according to the European Union. And this is where one of the big negatives comes in. A lot of this is also focused around the idea of misinformations. 70% of respondents believe disinformation is spread by manipulating algorithm processes on online platforms. This is the oft-repeated NPC narrative that, oh no, you see, Facebook, Google, YouTube, all of these, they are lying for the conservatives. They are spreading the anti-vax narrative because it gets them clicks. Meanwhile, us who actually use these platforms are looking around, hey, I'm not actually allowed to speak about this term at all. How the hell is this being spread then? It's a damn good question, isn't it? And this is, of course, used as an excuse to introduce new measures. Transparency of the rules for content moderation. Now, that is a good one, in part, until you realize that the EU also wants to use this transparency of rules to enforce yet more censorship. The EU is not against censorship in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it is a massive fan of it, so long it's in their favour. Meaningful information about advertising and target ads, who sponsored the ad and how and why it targeted a user. That's a good thing. This entire pack it's like this massive amalgamation of I want this and I think this might actually kill everything. It's almost as if they're trying to sneak in the good with the bad, hoping that we'll swallow the bad with the good, and hell, they're almost correct. Clear information on why content is recommended to users. Users' right to opt out from content recommendations based on profiling. Good. Platforms' participation in codes of practice as a measure to mitigate their risks. And better access to data for authorities and researchers to better understand virality online and its impact with a view to lower societal risk. And there's one of those social engineering things again. The EU wants access to Google's algorithm so that it can look at that and go, how can we make people do what we want them to do more reliably? What kind of propaganda functions well? And this is the issue, once more. I've said for a few years now that I would rather have the person who might potentially screw me over rather than the person who is currently actively dicking me. And that is a position I still firmly hold, but one should not assume that the government or regulations is good either, because it is not. Government regulations have every potential to be completely and utterly shitholy and just yet more propaganda-ish tyranny, and parts of this absolutely is. The European Union has a long and proud history of propagandizing people, particularly when it comes to referendums. They tend to hold a referendum, and if they don't get the results they want, well, they'll sit on it for a few years, pump out the propaganda a little bit, then hold another referendum. If that doesn't work, well, there's always next year, and so on and so on, so on, so on, so on. There's no limit to how many times they can hold a referendum after all. And this, well, they've realized that Google and such platforms have gotten very good at propagandizing people towards their particular point of view, so hey, might as well use that for their own benefits. The good part, however, is that this might actually be able, because the US bill stopped short of going quite this far, demanding a good long look into the algorithms, which kind of hampers the whole bill because, okay, you've made it illegal to unfairly, preferentially treat a platform's own product. Cool. But what do you define unfair as? And how are you going to prove that unfair treatment without deep access to the algorithms, not to mention months and months and months used to actually analyze the goddamn thing. There isn't a switch at the back of the YouTube algorithm that sees, and it's like, I prefer Google product, don't prefer Google product. No, it's a whole mess. Like, the algorithmic system on YouTube itself is a spaghetti, a mile long of intertwined code and various weighted relationships, to the point that these days, the people actually making this, and I've heard this from their engineers themselves, when they think, okay, we're gonna do this to tip this scale, they'll end up tipping off 12 other scales, and they're sitting there like, what? Why? How? And then they're gonna have to spend a week trying to figure out those questions. So, even if there is access to it, it's gonna take a very long time to analyze and actually dig down into the numbers to figure out what precisely is going on. There is going to be needed entire teams of researchers to figure out what is happening, why, and if it constitutes unfair treatment and preferential treatment, or if it might even simply be an accidental tweak. Somewhere down the line an engineer did this, ergo 6 months later, the world explodes. That's the butterfly effect. It literally is. The coding has gotten out of control, let's just put it like that. There's a hell of a lot more than this, and these are just the EU's own little propaganda points, basically, where they go like, oh, these are good things, and when they have to announce a bad thing, they add in a lot of words to make sure that you have a hard time figuring it out, because again, look at this monstrosity. Part of me can't even blame the EU representatives for getting their secretaries to read through legal measures and then tell them how to vote. Another common practice, by the way, even though, well, you are paid by the taxpayer to do this, so F you. This is your job. Sit your happy ass down, read the entire thing 3 times, and then write a goddamn book report on it. And if you don't want to, well, have you considered maybe making legislation that's less than 700 pages long? Just a generalized suggestion, honestly. Nevertheless, it is not as good as the US one, in my opinion, but it is far more wide-reaching for all the benefits and the negatives that will have. And I still do believe that this is the way to do it, because a lot of European countries essentially functions on the idea that everything is illegal, but the government and the police aren't actually going to bother enforcing 99.9% of it. Unfortunately, this does occasionally fail. Recently, for example, a poor old man in Norway was sent to jail for misgendering someone on the internet, which is just tyrannical. Like, oh hey, you didn't use the word we mandate you to use? Well, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to go to prison. Harsh, but exceedingly unfair as well. Until next time, I have been Arch, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.